Okay, so we just finished up talking about the category 1 critical public health hazard violations. Now we're moving on to category 2, so a little less serious in their risk for foodborne illness, but still are critical red violations that do need to be corrected on the spot. So that includes dented cans. So when we're talking about dented cans, definitely when you're getting in orders of these cans from your supplier, or you're looking at them yourself at a grocery store before you purchase them, check out all of the edges. Even something like this along the edge, let me get my little laser pointer. Even something like this along the edge is something that we would want to be removed from your shelf. We wouldn't want to use this if it happened prior to getting to you. So this is a close-up view of the damaged can seam right here. So in looking at, this is like a little cross section of what those can seams look like. And you can see that it's just that one edge is crimped over the other. So if you had damage to this, you can see how that would really easily possibly open up the hermetic seal of that, possibly introduce potential contamination there. So any dent like that, we would want to see this can discarded or returned to your distributor, or at least removed from your shelf for use. So that includes along the seams. Yeah, let me see if I can go back. No, not that one. You might have to tear off the label in some cases to get a better idea, but look for dents that are around this seam, but then also the side seams of the cans. If there's any type of damage to that side seam, you'll also want to remove it. And again, you might have to take off the label to be able to see. And then when we're looking for dents along the sides, if it is a dent that produces some sharp corners, we would want that removed. If it's an indent that doesn't produce sharp corners and it's not affecting the top or bottom seams or the side seam, that might be okay. But when in doubt, don't keep it. So besides dents, you can also have things like swelling of cans that happen. So this is a pretty crazy can that we came across. You can see the top of the can is completely swelled up. There is also some really crazy type of growth happening on the side here where there was possibly like a leak, but it was really hard to tell. I mean, clearly there was some type of leak, but who knows how long this had been there. So obviously, the facility did not plan on using this. This was just kind of like tucked away in the back. It just highlights that you should be going through your product. If you're not using it, throw it away. And then obviously this would still be a violation due to having this on their shelf for use. So place all dented cans in a separate area that's labeled with a sign. Dented and damaged cans should be discarded or returned for credit to your supplier. So this is an example in Mandarin. These folks had a little area where they were collecting cans for return. And this is another way that we've seen facilities do it. They just labeled the top saying when it was dented so that they could return it to the supplier. All right, this is another example of a critical right violation. So this is the storage of a raw product over a storage of a raw product over a cooked or prepped product. So something like this is some raw meat that's being stored over top of some sauces and vegetables down here. If we did not see contamination of the product underneath, we would simply have you rearrange and relocate those items. If we did see contamination, we would elevate this to a Category 1 violation where you would then need to discard this product, and we would conduct enforcement action. If it is simply the relocation of these products, it's this lower level, but still a red violation where you would need to correct that on site for us. So this is another example where location might be an issue. So in this case, what we're seeing is some juice leakage from some of these raw meat products. I like that they're using these sheet pans to collect those juices, but it looks like it's getting a little filled. So I would say that if you're using these, you should just be really careful about monitoring the level of the juice and thinking about how you're going to safely remove that potentially contaminated juice. If we saw this in a facility, I would probably stand and watch food service workers to see if they're going to be moving these things, how they do it. If there's drippage, what they do with that afterwards. You know, if they're moving this package of meat, was it touching the juice over here? Are these at different cooking temperatures where we should be moving one to the other side? This looks like a beef. I'm not sure if this is chicken. If beef is cooked to 140, chicken needs to be cooked to 165. We should really be separating these products at a further distance. So another critical red violation is not having or using your probe thermometer. So this is the thermometer that you should be using at all times to cook or to check the internal temperatures of your food. So when we use these types of probe thermometers, we need to insert the tip of this into the thickest part of the food product to measure the internal temperature. So once again, not having these or using them is a critical violation. We will be looking for them, looking for where they are in your facility, and then also if you're using them, should be used during cooking, cooling, reheating, and hot holding on a regular basis. So this is a violation here of having toxic chemicals improperly labeled, stored, or used so that contamination of food can occur. So right here we see a can of WD-40. It's on the food storage shelf. You know, this is something that you can have these types of products in your facility, but they shouldn't be stored on a shelf with food. This is another type of potential contamination issue that we are seeing quite frequently in restaurants now. This is a product that's used for pest control. It's a little chemical bar in here that it contains a chemical called dichlorvose. And over time, this bar just aerosolizes itself to reach the flies and other pests that might be flying around an area and kills them wherever they are. So there's two kind of potential issues going on with this. If it kills a fly product, if if it kills a fly and the fly is flying over a piece of food, it's just going to land in your food. And then also, based on the manufacturer's instructions for these types of products, due to their aerosolization, they shouldn't be used around food or people. The way that they're meant to be used is like overnight in an enclosed space without people and without food. Just due to the way that this type of chemical disperses itself. So if we see these and we see them being used around food or around people, they will be removed and a violation will be cited. So this is something also that we'll talk about in later slides, where any type of product, any type of chemical product that has an EPA registration number associated with it, typically used for pest management, needs to be installed and monitored by a registered pest controller. So although you can buy these types of pest control products in like a Home Depot or Lowe's, you cannot be installing them yourself unless you are a registered pest controller with the EPA. All right, so this is some insect spray here. Oh, made this. So like I just said, this type of product, it's not allowed to be, we really shouldn't be seeing it in your facility. If we do, we're going to mark it as a violation. Because these types of products and insect control products have an EPA number associated with them, they should only be used by a registered pest controller in your facility. It's a violation if we see these in here. It would be a further violation if we saw these being stored next to food. In this case, this is a decorative piece of corn. I don't think we would do a double violation on this. So this is something that we see frequently, a bunch of chemicals being stored underneath of a 3-bay sink. And this is okay. We like that all of the chemicals are being stored together and away from food. That is important. I would just, be careful about thinking about how are we going to clean under this space. It'd be a better idea if we have these in a closet somewhere or up off the floor so that we can clean underneath of it. And I'm also thinking about this, what's the issue with something like this? Is labeling. So a critical violation is not having products labeled. We've had it happen before where at a bar, someone finished up a bottle of vermouth and filled it again with a cleaning product and then stored it under the bar. And at one point, then a bartender had served someone that chemical cleaning product, thinking that it was some vermouth. So labeling and keeping things in the original containers is very, very important. What if these were mixed up, or things under here were improperly labeled. The potential is for a risk is not good. All right, so many times we see basements that might have a lot of these types of products for working on your car or the grill in the back or, whatever it might be. That's fine. That's fine to store these things if they are being stored away from food. Okay, now we're moving on to temperature-related violations. which are still red critical violations, many times associated with foodborne illness. So this is one where hazardous foods are not held below 45 degrees. So in looking at this picture, you know, this is a large amount of a rice product that I would be concerned about this being able to be held at 45 or below. When we try to hold foods in an ice bath, we need to make sure that the ice is at least at the level of the food product in the container. In this particular instance, you can see that the ice is really only on these two sides. It's not on the top or the bottom. It's also just a large amount of product. If we saw this, we would take a temperature of it, see what it's at. We would also recommend that this be split up into multiple smaller containers and then completely embedded in the ice so that it can maintain that temperature. Similarly with these sauce products, the level of the sauce in this one is pretty high. If this is something that needs to be kept cold, it should be probably put into smaller containers. So this is showing some of the little inserts into a sandwich prep table. There's a few different things going on in this picture, but one of the main things to note about these inserts is that if you read the instructions on some of the, or the manuals on some of these pieces of equipment, they'll tell you that the tray, these little container inserts, they have a recommendation of how high you store the food in these so that they can actually maintain proper temperature. And that is no higher than this little rim right here. So if we were inspectors and we went into this restaurant, we would probably be, you know, looking at this cheese that seems to be getting a little bit high. You know, whatever this sauce is here, we might check the temperature of that. Then also in general, keeping the doors to these sandwich prep coolers closed. Many times they're being stored right across from the hot stove. And so, and people are working in here constantly, but they keep the hood open and all of the cold air escapes. And many times we'll find that these food products in here are really at, you know, 60, 65 degrees. So reminding food service workers to keep this closed when they can is really important to keep the cold air in. And obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this glove. This is not a good place to be storing your used gloves. Right, so we're seeing some ice cream buckets here. It looks like they are trying to be held cold in these ice baths. Once again, the ice level in here is definitely not as high as the ice cream inside. So we would take a temperature of these, make sure that they're being held properly. You'd also, it looks like a lot of it is turning liquid. We would just want to make sure that, you know, the staff they have a plan to refill some of the ice in here, make sure it's staying cold. And then also, just to mention with these types of scoops that's being used, you can see how the little thumb action piece on these types of scoops many times is embedded into the food product. We want to make sure that the food service workers are wearing a glove when they go to use these. Otherwise, they are potentially bare hand contacting the food product. And then also, you know, when thinking about maintenance of your utensils over here, I would be a little worried about, like, where did this end cap to this scoop go? We might ask that you just throw that away. Excuse me. right? So thinking more about temperature related violations. This is one where hazardous foods are not cooled properly. This is it's a big container of chicken wings that have been cooked. The recommendation, once again, is the height of the food when cooling should not be over 4 inches high. This is probably closer to 8 inches high. If we saw this in a facility, we'd take a temperature right in the thickest part here and see what's going on. We'd ask some questions of the operator. How long has it been there? When did you cook it? Questions like that. And we would definitely have you split this up into smaller containers to cool properly. This is a little hard to see, but this was rice that was left out at room temperature to cool, and it's at about 70 degrees. Once again, we would ask the operator some questions. When was it cooked? How long has it been there? We'd mark down on our inspection form what the current temperature was. And based on that, we would likely have you discard of this food product since it's been out for too long, has the potential for bacteria growth at that room temperature, danger zone temperature range. All right, so this is something that we see pretty often too, where an operator had cooked some roast beef and then they cut it, wanting it to cool properly in the 5-pound or less chunks of beef, and but they went ahead and then wrapped it up in a nice little plastic blankie and then threw it all back together anyway in the cooler. What they really should have done was leave it uncovered and spread out all these chunks so that there's more surface area for the cool air to circulate around it so that it cools properly. If we saw this in a facility, once again, we stick our thermometers right here in the thickest part and just see, what's the temperature like right there. It's probably still pretty warm if they had taken this out relatively recently. So this is just an example of an operator taking some stock out of a pot and filling a container with it to try to help it cool properly. You really should only let that go up to about 4 inches high, but that is it looks like a thinner product, so it should be able to cool properly at that depth. This is a good example of proper cooling that we had seen in one of our facilities. This was maybe only 1 inch or 2 of a beef roast stew that was put into one of these pans. It was covered after it had cooled and put into one of these speed racks. This is an example of using one of those ice ones that we had talked about. The operator had been demonstrating how he was going to swap out this one with this is the old one with a fresh one with ice. So you can see how using an ice wand in like a 5-gallon bucket of food like this, you would be able to cool the food from the inside out and use, a bigger container to store that food. But once again, I caution with using these, you have to make sure that you're swapping them out and still monitoring. You have to ensure the cleanliness of the ice wand itself. And you just have to be sure that you're still monitoring the temperature of the food. It depends on the thickness, depends on the size of the bucket that you're using. This is another thing that we see, the hazardous foods being left out at room temperature. So these egg rolls, they had been sitting out next to the fryer waiting for someone to order them. They had not yet been ordered. Sitting out at room temperature is not allowed. These should have been placed back into the reach-in cooler and taken out per order. The other issue that we see many times, I just want to highlight from this photo, is the use of oil to cover surfaces. Many times places like to use this just as a way to easily clean, but there are numerous issues with it. You can see that this one is just flaking off. Where do you think these flakes really go? They have the potential to end up in your food. And then also, you know, to be used as something to easily clean is not the purpose. You should really just be cleaning the surface to begin with. This also creates a harborage spot for pests like cockroaches who love to scoot up in between two surfaces and feel a surface on both their back and their legs. If we saw this in our facility, we would ask you to remove it and clean that original surface instead. All right, so this is also room temperature storage we're seeing here. This little dial thermometer, it's at about 80 degrees. You can see that, you know, many times in facilities that do pizza, might be leaving out those products on the counter. If these products contain any type of cooked vegetable on top, they'd be considered potentially hazardous, and therefore they need to be their time or temperature controlled for safety. So something like this sitting out at room temperature, we'd ask more questions. How long has it been there? And then we would determine what needs to happen next. So like I said, you've probably seen this in pizza places that might sell pizza by the slice. They'll have pizzas setting out. They're not under temperature control, but in this case, they would need to be under time control. Any type of pizza that has a topping that is potentially hazardous, once again, that's any type of cooked vegetable or cooked meat, besides a crispy cooked bacon or pepperoni, they would need to be thrown away after a certain amount of time. And for, you know, an easy way to do this is we should be seeing a log of these as far as when they're taken out of the oven and a time in which they need to be thrown away by. It looks like right here, this might be the log that this operator is keeping for these pizzas. So here we're seeing some dressings and some tuna or clams being refrigerated. This is just highlighting the violation in regards to hazardous foods not being prepared using a pre-chilled ingredient. So if you're making something like a salad that contains mayo or tuna or like a mac salad, it's a good idea to just pre-chill those ingredients before you mix them together. Right. So this is one of an inspector's worst nightmares when you walk into a big walk-in cooler that's filled with food and you realize that the ambient temperature is feeling rather warm. And you take out your thermometer and you realize it's 54 degrees in the walk-in cooler, and then you wonder how long has it been that way. So this is a violation when refrigerated storage is not operating properly So in this case, we then stabbed some of these big, huge tubes of ground meat and found and some other big chunks of cheese, and found that the internal temperature of these really thick products was also at 54 degrees. So we know that the cooler has been at that temperature for quite some time. And in that case, you know, all the potentially hazardous foods in that cooler need to be thrown out. So monitoring the temperature of your walk-ins is very important. You don't, and in this case, it was also an issue with the little internal thermometer that was then showing up digitally on the outside of the door. That was not showing properly. But the food service workers had said that they noticed that it was feeling rather warm in there. So, you know, communication about that and then getting a maintenance person in there ASAP is critical to saving your products in here. So this is another issue we see, especially when places try to change their menu items quite a bit, or they're a newer facility that then realize that they're getting a lot of business. Not having enough refrigerated storage is an issue, because once you start to pack in all of these products, things are not going to be able to cool properly, or they're not going to be able to be held properly. This puts a large strain on the cooler itself, and it's not meant to be maintained with that much product stuffed in there. So when planning for your facility and planning your menu items, you really need to think about refrigerated storage space, and do you have enough? This is another example of that, where they didn't have enough room in their walk-in cooler upstairs, so they started storing some, you know, some pizza dough in their beer cooler in the basement. And it's like you get to the point where you can't even walk in there to get stuff, let alone cool things properly. So this is another issue where hazardous foods are not held above 140 degrees. So in this picture, it's a little hard to tell, but this is a very thick, deep dish pizza that is being held hot under a heat lamp. So heat lamps, they work. They can hold certain foods at 140 or above, but for something thick like this, it's never going to happen. Once you make an attempt to hot hold something, it needs to be an internal product temperature of 140 degrees or above. So a heat lamp is an attempt to hot hold. If we saw this thick product, then we would take a temperature of it, see what the temperature was. We'd ask questions, how long has it been there? Then we would make a determination as to whether or not this is a food product that could be kept. So this is a steam table, another way to hot hold food products. This one actually looks like it's a little bit on the cool side, maybe less than 140 degrees. So remember that when you're using a hot holding device, a hot holding device is meant to hot hold. It is not designed to reheat food products. So many times when the issues that we're seeing with hot holding devices, it's not necessarily that the equipment itself isn't able to hot hold, it's that someone didn't properly reheat the food prior to placing it in a preheated steam table or hot holding device. Make sure that you reheat these on the stove, you preheat the hot holding device, and then you put it in there. So this looks like a clean example of a hot holding device that has some heat lamps in it. You know, I would be looking over here. I'm not quite sure if the heat lamp is on over these pieces of chicken here. It looks like it's on over here. You know, I'm not quite sure if this is maybe gravy in here, but I would be concerned as to whether or not it could really hot hold, something like that. Also double layering of the food products here. If this was a potentially hazardous food product, we'd want to make sure that it's maybe spread out in one layer, depending on what it was. So just keeping in mind that you should be monitoring these with your thermometer to be sure that the food products are actually going to be hot held at 140 or above. This is just another example of a hot holding device. This is one of the more high-end products where it's a very high-powered steam table that you can almost boil these products in here, even in a big pot like this. I believe this one is from one of the hospitals. So not everyone has access to one of these, but they're pretty cool. All right, another red critical violation is hazardous foods not cooked or reheated to proper temperatures. So this is a batch of par cooked chicken wings, meaning they were only partially cooked. This would be a violation. We want to fully cook chicken to 165 prior to cooling down. So that reduces the amount of time that a food product is in the danger zone temperature range. We don't want to see par cooking like this. When we're cooking a food product, it should go all the way to the required minimum internal temperature prior to cooling back down. All right, so this is an example of someone using a needle probe thermometer to temp some cooked ground beef patties, and it looks like the temperature was at 166 degrees. So for ground beef, remember that the minimum internal required temperature is 158. So those should be good. We love to see this, by the way, of people taking pictures while we're there. All right, whole poultry, it must be fully thawed prior to cooking. This is another critical red violation if we do see someone trying to cook some frozen turkeys. This is just that the food product is so large that if you try to put a bird like this in the oven, there might be some portions of the meat that are actually still frozen when you're trying to cook the outside, that some portions of the meat might be in the danger zone temperature range for an extended period of time. That would be too risky. So just make sure that if you're doing whole poultry, you should fully thaw it prior to cooking. So now we're talking about the blue or maintenance violations. We've just gone over all of the red category types of violations that are more serious and typically have more connections directly to foodborne illness. Blue or maintenance violations, on the other hand, they're a less serious category, but they are ones that can quickly turn into red violations if they're not maintained. So we will go through these and you'll get an idea of the types of blue maintenance violations that we can see in facilities. So to start off, many of these are kind of common sense related, but we should still go over them to be sure that they're covered. So recommended working habits for employees. Obviously, you should not work if you're ill or if you have infected cuts on your hands and you're going to be preparing food. An infected cut on your hands, sometimes we're asked about this. An infection in a cut means that there's some type of bacteria infiltration. So we don't want to have that be a potential spread to any type of food. So food workers that have infected cuts, they shouldn't be the ones preparing or serving food. So wash your hands after sneezing, coughing, scratching your head, wiping mouth or nose, smoking, eating, or handling garbage. Really, you should be washing your hands frequently when you are a food service worker, and certainly after any of these activities. Use utensils or gloves to mix, dispense, or handle foods. Never smoke, eat, drink, or chew gum in food areas. The one thing that we do allow is a covered type of cup with a straw. You can have a drink in the food service area if it has a cover and a straw. And the reason for that is that we want to keep your hands as far away from the mouthpiece of the drinking glass as far as possible to reduce any type of potential hand to mouth activity. In general, to be safe, you really shouldn't be doing much of any of these activities in the food areas. Never taste food with a mixing or stirring spoon. If you do want to taste a food product, you should take a clean, sanitized spoon, take a taste, and then discard or put that tasting spoon in the area to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized. Use a hair restraint. So this can be anything like a hair tie, a hair clip. It can be a hat in combination with a hair tie or hair clip, or a hair net, but it doesn't always have to be the traditional hair net. And then the idea behind having a hair restraint is more so to reduce the hand to hair contact activity. That's sometimes like an unconscious behavior where you're really just, you're touching a potentially an area that might have bacteria buildup without washing your hands between. So having a hair restraint is more so to reduce that type of activity rather than the actual hair fall into a food item, although obviously we do want to reduce hair fall into food items as well. Don't touch parts of dishes that will be touched by the customer. Never dry your hands on dish towels, aprons, or uniforms. The only place you should be drying your hands is on a disposable paper towel or using a hot air blow dryer. Never carry used tissues in your pocket while working in this food service area. Store your personal items in an area separate from food storage or prep. So this is an important piece that we're looking for when we're doing plan reviews. If you are a new facility or if you are a facility opening up a restaurant that's been closed for a while, when we do a plan review, we're going to be looking for an area that you're specifically storing personal items so that they don't end up being coats and purses being hung on food storage racks. We have had in the past cases of infestations of bed bugs that have been transferred actually from personal items into food storage areas, just from, people not having a separate space to store those items. It did contaminate the food areas, which was unfortunate and could have been prevented if we had a separate area. So this is an example of food being unprotected because it is being stored on the floor. Any type of food storage or drink storage, you should have some type of surface that is being stored up above the floor at least 6 inches. And that goes for a dry storage area as well as in like walk-in coolers. And in the walk-in coolers, the reasoning behind having food up above the ground 6 inches is also for that cold air to circulate around the product. So this is also an example of where we might want to change where food is being stored. This right here is a rice cooker. It is being stored right next to the dirty end of a 3-bay sink. Just thinking about the potential splash from this dirty sink into this rice cooker. It's not a good idea to have this stored here. We would probably be looking for other places, or another option might be to install a splash guard here so that there's a bigger barrier. All right, so this is some Frito-Lay. It looks like some food that's being stored on the floor. Once again, these types of things should be stored up off the floor. You can also see that, it's really hard to clean the floor when you have all of this clutter around. It should be stored up off the floor so you can easily clean around it. This is a photo of inside of a walk-in cooler. Sometimes we'll get questions about this. It looks like here they're using pallets as a shelf to keep things up off the floor. However, I would caution about using something like a pallet because it's a little bit lower to the ground than we would want. We're not going to be getting out our measuring tape to see if it's exactly 6 inches or above, but here the purpose once again is to be able to get to clean underneath. You're really not going to be able to get back here with a mop or broom. Just with how this is set up and how low it is to the floor. So in this case, I wouldn't recommend that they're using a pallet as their food storage shelf. This kind of illustrates, I believe, this is some Dasani, might be some water bottles in here. Why we want to keep things up off the floor. Once again, it looks like maybe a dirty mop had bumped up against this box and gotten some dirty mop water on there. So also make sure that any soda bottles, those should be stored up off the floor as well. Drinks are considered a consumable product, just like food. All right, so this type of shelving unit here, this looks like it was like a makeshift one with some cinder blocks. And that's all right. Once again, we're not going to get out our measuring tape. We just want to make sure that we're able to clean underneath. The shelf itself should be smooth and easily cleanable. So this might be okay. And just thinking about, we might see this sometimes in a restaurant where there's a little butt to a cigarette here. We might be doing some further investigation into that as to, really shouldn't be smoking inside and shouldn't be smoking around food areas. So this photo is a good example of a very organized dry storage area. You know, these are the typical food storage racks that we'd see both in dry storage and in walk-in coolers. And these are very nice ones to have. They can be wheeled around so that you can clean underneath, but they are also at least 6 inches up off the floor anyway, so that you can reach a mop or a broom under there. And then also these types of wire racks are good for in walk-in coolers just because the cold air can circulate around the product. All right, so things like this we want to think about. So if we're looking for red violations, we want to make sure that things are labeled. This is probably salt, sugar, MSG, but I'm not sure which is which. We are concerned in blue violation category as far as things being covered and protected. In this particular case, none of these things are covered, and so we're seeing some potential contamination, which could be elevated to a red violation. In looking at this, this is typically also a little setup in front of a walk station where we might see some other potentially hazardous foods being left out, maybe some garlic and oil that should really be sitting in the walk-in cooler or the reaching cooler across from the stove. This also might be some broth that might not have the burner on, so that's something that we typically check to be sure burners are on things that they're sitting out at a walk station. But keeping in mind, keeping products labeled, keeping products covered, and then keeping things in the fridge that might need to be in the fridge if they are potentially hazardous, or keeping things hot if they are potentially hazardous foods that should be hot held. Okay, so something like this, thinking again about blue violations, want to make sure that these types of foods are covered. This is quite a big mess. We would also want to make sure that things are cleaned up around here. You know, as far as storage off the floor, this is a little bit questionable as to whether or not they'd be able to reach up under here. We kind of have to assess that in person. But the bigger issue here right now is that these should be maintained with a cover. I'm not even seeing a cover in here. I'm also seeing that there's a mop being stored right next to these uncovered containers, and I would want to have that discussion with that operator as far as where else they might be able to store these things, in addition to getting covers for these maybe flour and this might be sugar containers, and again, labeling these products as well. So this is a similar but different situation. These containers have lids. I would probably, you know, be worried having them clean up around here would be the next action step. And if whether or not this is high enough off the floor. Okay, scoop storage we could talk about. This is not a good way to be storing scoops. There are a few different ways to store them. You can store them in food with the handle up. Ice is considered food. If we saw this happening in a restaurant, we would ask that the operator put on a glove before reaching in to grab this scoop out, for the potential for them to touch the ice when they go to grab the handle. The other way that we can store scoops is cleaned and sanitized. And that can be, you know, in a cleaned bucket on the outside of an ice machine. It can also be stored in a dipper well, which in many ice cream shops, they have them. It's the little cups that have fresh water flowing over the top of it. You just have to remember that scoops cannot be stored in sanitizer solution. They can't be stored in room temperature stagnant water. They can't be stored with the handle down. And they can't be stored in ice machines that are actively making ice for the potential for the ice to cover up the handle while it's producing the ice. So this is a really good example of the ice scoop being stored in the ice that's being used for service with the handle up. Another thing to mention here is if you have an older facility that has a cold plate, that is these metal plates that you put on the bar that have the lines for all of your beverages going through it. You want to always have that cold plate covered in ice because it helps to keep everything cold. But that cold plate is not a food safe contact surface. So you can't simply fill this whole bin with ice if you intend to use that ice for your drinks. You have to have a separate container to use and store ice that you're going to be using for service for your drinks. If you've ever looked at those cold plates, you would understand that they're all dinged up. They have a whole bunch of nooks and crannies in them from the soft metal that's used, and they typically are not cleaned underneath. So there's this great biofilm slime buildup that collects on the underside of these really heavy plates. So it's not appropriate to be using service ice that you're using for drinks that has had contact with a cold plate. Just make sure that you're putting some other type of bucket in there if you're using ice for service. Another option for storing scoops when they're not in use is in something that we've seen more recently called a conserve well. It actually keeps the water in here at 140 degrees or above, and then also has a little timer on it so that and it beeps like every 2 hours or less. It's set it for a different time period so that you remember to swap out the water every so often. So that's also an option because that the heated water is not going to harbor bacteria growth as much as like room temperature stagnant water. So this here is a photo of some of these bowls that were being used as scoops. This is not an appropriate way to, well, first of all, this is not an appropriate scoop. It doesn't have a handle, and it appears like a lot of these bowls are really in not very good condition. It looks like some chunks are missing, and there's a lot of nooks and crannies that can harbor bacteria growth. But then also they're not being stored properly, right? We should store scoops cleaned and sanitized in the food with a handle up, or in some type of dipper well or heated water. Those are really the only ways to store scoops. So this would be a violation here, and it could be multiple violations. Having a magnetic strip is an excellent way to store things like knives. You're able to quickly see that they're clean. There's no really potential contamination depending on where you have this magnetic strip. It's a much better option than sometimes, actually many times we'll see knives being stored like in the cranny in like a prep table like this between two tables. And it's, you can't see where the knife is being stored and its sanitary condition. when you shove it between there, and many times there's just a big gunk food buildup in that cranny that the knife is being stored. So recommend something like this so that you can actually see the cleanliness of the utensil. So single service utensils should only be stored with their fork ends and their handles all in the same direction. So if they're out for public use, all the handles should be sticking up together so that someone's not forced to touch the end that someone would put in their mouth. They also shouldn't be stored over a trash can. Another type of blue violation is not having these thermometers to measure temperatures inside of all of your refrigeration and freezer units. So, like I mentioned with an earlier example of a violation where the ambient temperature of a walk-in cooler was off, there had been an issue with the digital reading of that thermometer. I recommend that you just purchase a large pack of these smaller thermometers that you can put internally on all of your refrigeration units, your reach-ins, and your freezers, and just ensure. And you can't just put them there. You have to be checking them frequently to be sure that that they are within the proper range. So in this particular walk-in, if they had been checking this one is also showing that the ambient temperature is within the danger zone. It looks to be about 55 degrees in here. So if someone had been checking this one, they would have realized there's something going on with that refrigeration unit. Improperly thawing is a blue violation as well. This is one where, in order to properly thaw, there are a few methods. One of them, the best one being in the refrigerator overnight. Another option is cold running water, but you need to have the product submerged in the water. You can't just have one stream landing on one part of the product. This essentially over here, room temperature storage. I can get my laser pointer here. This product is not even being touched by the stream of water here coming out of the faucet. So this is essentially room temperature storage. The only part really being contacted by this water is right here. So just ensure that if you are trying to thaw a product, it needs to be submerged in water with an outlet from the cold water tap. You can also, as a better option, putting that food product in the refrigerator overnight. You can also use the microwave to thaw food products, and then also you can thaw products as part of the cooking process. But this right here, you're improperly thawing. This can quickly turn into a red violation if this food product over here was in the danger zone temperature range. So this is a blue violation that can quickly turn into a red if there was a temperature issue going on too. So this slide shows a lot of different items going on with employees, behaviors, and hygiene. So in thinking about up here, obviously we want to have clean hands on our food service workers. We get a lot of questions about, are artificial nails okay? The code doesn't specifically specify that your nails have to be a certain length. That's kind of a judgment protocol or policy that your facility should develop. But in looking at hands, they should be cleaned. They should appear cleaned. They should be easily cleanable. If people do have longer nails, it's a good idea maybe to have a fingernail brush over at the hand wash sink, especially if people are doing a lot of more food prep activities that might get dirtier products under their fingernails. And this picture always reminds me to talk a little bit about the importance of proper hand washing. Many times people will think that hand sanitizer is a good replacement for hand washing. Not true. If you think about your hands at the microscopic level, they're really covered in dirt, even if they appear clean. Your hands really are just always covered in this layer unless they are freshly washed and haven't touched anything. So when you're using hand sanitizer, you're really just effectively coating the outside clumps of whatever bacteria might be on your hands currently, and it might kill off that outer layer. But if there are clumps, the layers on the inside might survive. But when you wash your hands with soap and running water, the soap is coating those clumps of bacteria and dirt on your hands, and the running water is physically washing them away. So hand sanitizer is never going to be a replacement for proper hand washing with soap and running. All right, like we talked about, food service workers, they can have a cup like this if it has a cover, and a straw. We're okay with that type of being used in the food service area. We shouldn't be seeing food service workers eating or drinking out of any other type of container. This is a food service worker that looks very put together. She is wearing a hair restraint. She's wearing an apron. An apron's not a requirement, but it's a good idea. Everything else seems friendly about her. No smoking inside the establishment, obviously. If people do go outside to smoke, they should be washing their hands when they come back in and before they prep food. Cell phones, we really don't want to see them in the food prep area at all. I know people like to use them for music. If they're being used for music, keep them out of sight. We don't like to see them because it just enforces like a hand to surface type of activity in the middle of food prep, where we know that these aren't being cleaned and sanitized after every time you go and touch them and fiddle with the music on them. So keep them away. And then, like we talked about, there should be a nice storage area where people are storing personal items separate from food prep and food storage areas. All right, this is a picture of a spatula. If we see deteriorated utensils like this, we're going to ask that they're just thrown away. It is a violation to have these types of utensils in your facility. All the pieces from this rubber spatula likely just ended up in food, and then they also create just harborage spots for bacteria and dirt and microorganisms to just grow in those little nooks and crannies. Things like chipped porcelain cookware. Porcelain is easily chipped, and once it becomes deteriorated like this, you shouldn't be using it. And if we see it, we'll ask you to remove it from your facility. This is another example we talked about a little earlier when we were talking about proper storage of scoops, food scoops. This is the cold plate. It's a little better look at a cold plate. All of these little lines are running through here. Typically, you do want to cover this in ice just so that it keeps the lines cold. This plate itself is made of a soft metal that is not food safe. So any contact surface that has contact with food or its food prep surface needs to be a food safe surface that is smooth and easily cleanable. These, if you've ever taken a closer look, are just, they're never smooth. They always have, cracks in them, little nooks and crannies, and then they're pretty heavy, and underneath of them, hard to clean. There's always like a slime buildup because of the ice that goes on them. So this ice that's here cannot be used for drinks in a bar. This is a photo of like a pine piece of wood that was being used as a cutting board. You can't use those types of soft woods as a food contact surface. You are allowed to use hardwoods, so anything like a maple, a bamboo, a walnut, sealed woods. Those can be used, but soft woods like this pine, it's absorbing things. It's soft enough that every time you cut, there's a nook and a cranny that just creates a harborage spot for growth of microorganisms. So we're on the theme of surfaces being smooth and easily cleanable. This clearly is not a smooth and easily cleanable spot. You can see that all these, there was some duct tape on here that had been partially pulled off, multiple layers of tile that just had been peeled off, and sticky pieces that remained, that just a whole bunch of buildup happening here. Actual sticky areas where the food debris just kind of built up. So, and clearly this is where, we're using a number 10 can opener, where clearly food is being set here at some points, and some pots and everything. So if we see this in your facility, we're going to ask you to probably just tear this whole thing out and somehow make this surface smooth and easily cleanable. And while we're on it, these can opener blades are a frequent violation, just for not being cleaned and sanitized. So just remember to pull these things out of here, run them through your dishwasher, run the blade through your wash, rinse, sanitize cycles. And if the buildup gets too much, or we've seen sometimes the gunk behind the blade gets so hard to get at, it's easy enough just to get a pack of those new blades and unscrew and put a new one in. Might be even easier than cleaning it. Talking about the 3-bay sinks again, your 3-bay sink should only be used for wash, rinse, and sanitizing of your equipment and utensils. So in this case, we were seeing this food service worker was doing some food preparation in the 3-bay sink. That would not be an appropriate use for the 3-bay sink. You should only be using your food preparation sink for food prep. So to sanitize your food contact surfaces and other surfaces throughout your facility, you should be making up some type of sanitizer bucket on a regular rotating basis throughout the workday. This photo here is demonstrating that many chemical distributors or even at Restaurant Depot should have these like test strips, or you can buy them online, that will show you that once you make up your sanitizer solution, whether or not it's at proper concentration. And then also these can give you an idea if you should be swapping out that solution throughout the day, since naturally, if it's a chlorine type of solution, it will dissipate in its strength with time. So your sanitizer buckets, they should also have a wiping cloth in them. Wiping cloths used for sanitizing wipes should only be stored in your sanitizing buckets so that they're being actively sanitized. This is a very frequent violation we see too, where the sanitizing wipes are just sitting out of solution. Just make sure that food service workers are continually putting these back in buckets. This is just another example of that. All right, now moving on to kind of cleaning and sanitizing pieces of equipment. This is a case where you can pretty clearly see that there were multiple food products that were put through this meat slicer, cleaning in between. And you can see quite a bit of buildup over here as well. This is just a closer look. Meat slicers really need to be taken apart completely and made sure that you're getting into all the nooks and crannies where food buildup can occur. Many times we'll see on the cleat part of the meat slicer, there's just a bunch of food debris that really needs to be cleaned out of there. This was another case of some fryer baskets that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in a very long time. I think in this case, once we had discussed this with the operator, these baskets were just thrown away. This is also another frequent area where we're seeing a lack of proper cleaning and sanitizing. That is on the wire racks, either in dry food storage or in the walk-in coolers. Just a lot of buildup of food that can happen on these wire racks. And then if you think about how risky the potential is for other food contamination here, especially when the wire racks are right over food, especially this bucket here it was uncovered. Thinking about every time a food service worker might put a container of food up on here and slide it back into its place, has a potential for a chunk of this food buildup gunk to fall right into the pail below. This was also an issue where the scoop for this food down here in the bucket was just this this cup that we had to address with this operator as well. So here's a picture of one of the larger can openers. When talking about the blades, you can see there's normally a lot of gunk buildup that we see behind here. Just make sure that these are being cleaned and sanitized on a very regular basis. And after each can opening, really, because each time you open a can, this blade is really contacting the food inside. Okay, so now we're talking about a proper hand wash facility station. So this hand wash station is a sink right here. We have a little remember to wash your hands sign. We are missing paper towels. So that's a violation right there. You need to have single service paper towels to dry your hands. Or you can use a hot blow dryer. And in this case, this facility was using some bar soap. And many times people don't think that bar soap is appropriate to use, or it might be a violation. Not so. People can use bar soap. If you think about it, it is a surfactant, just like liquid soap, and it's not a surface that's going to grow bacteria. So if you think about it, people will soap up their hands and then use the running water, rinsing away any of that potential dirt and bacteria. So hand soap is okay, or a bar soap is okay. That, just for more convenient use, liquid soap is typically more what we see. But once again, for a proper hand washing sinks station, we should have the signs, but they're not enough. We need to have paper towels or a hot blow dryer, soap, and running hot and cold water. And of course, be using it frequently. And like I mentioned earlier, hand sanitizer, that's a little added bonus if you want to have it. It's not required for the code, and it's definitely not a replacement for proper hand washing with running water and soap. So this is another example of a hand wash station. The station, assuming it has hot and cold running water, has some hand soap, has the sign, and it has some paper towels. So this is something that we would typically catch during a pre-operational inspection or doing a plan review. And occasionally we will see it during our regular inspections, but any toilet rooms, any bathrooms need to have a self-closing door. So that means that when someone leaves the bathroom, the door to the bathroom itself needs to close on its own. And the reason for that is really just for the potential for toilet spray to be able to track and get onto other surfaces. All right, indirect drain. Just want to give you a definition of this, and then we'll talk about where this is required. An indirect drain, it's a drain that does not connect directly to a drainage system, but it discharges through an air break or air gap into a receptor. So an indirect drain per plumbing code is required on any food preparation sink. So if you're doing any type of fresh fruit or vegetable preparation, or rinsing of pasta, or rinsing of any grain, or whatever it is, if you're using water to help you clean food, or rinse food in any way, it should be done in a food preparation sink, and the food preparation sink needs to have an indirect drain on the outlet of it. So imagine you have a sink up here where you're prepping your food. The outlet from that sink goes down here, the water comes down here, you'll actually see the water and when it goes out into the wastewater system. So technically, based on plumbing code, this should be how the indirect drain looks, the diameter of the outlet from the sink, the distance between the outlet of the sink and the receptor should be 2 times the diameter of the outlet to the sink. We're not necessarily getting out there, once again, with our measuring tape. Something like this, as an example, is probably going to be just fine. We do see many cases, though, where, you know, we're being told that that is an indirect drain, but this pipe goes so deep into this one that we really can't tell if there's some type of connection or how far this outlet really goes. So, you know, some cases where we've said that this is a violation, someone will get right under the sink with a hacksaw and just correct it right in front of us. It's really quite an easy fix if you don't have it currently on your food preparation sinks. You really should. And so the purpose of this, though, is that if there were ever to be a backup of your of sewage in your facility, we don't want there to be any potential for it to come up into a food preparation sink and contaminate the bottom of your food sink. So if there was a backup of sewage, it would just come up here and spill out onto the floor rather than going up into your food preparation sink. There's the gap there. So many times on new construction, this is something that just automatically goes in. It's even going into like 3-bay sinks, where all the sinks are just connected as one into a main floor drain like this. That is incorrect. All right. Still kind of on the theme of plumbing violations. This was an issue that was seen in one of our facilities where this leak was being caused by a plugged condenser line drain in the condenser fan of their freezer. So we see this many times if there's some type of clog in the drain line for the condenser fan, that it starts to drip and ice will start to build up. This is a concern for a few different reasons. I mean, clearly you can see that this is a slip and fall hazard for employees, but also if this ice contacted any food, it would be a much more serious violation as well, because this type of fluid is coming off of a condenser, a drain fan that has, you know, copper lines in it that are very high in heavy metals. So this type of fluid it's not just water that's coming off of here. If this were to be contacting any food, it would be a much more serious issue. In this particular case, it was not, but it was still obviously a slip and fall hazard, and then also a plumbing issue with proper drainage of their condenser fan. So this was chipped away at and cleaned up in a pretty quick fashion after we had visited. All right, now on to things like garbage and refuse and proper sanitization of that. So this dumpster is missing its cover, or its cover is off and not just turned over. So if we're able to see your dumpster area, we're going to take a look at it when we're out there inspecting. Your dumpsters should be covered, and that's really just to prevent nuisance conditions. We don't want pests going in and out of these as much as possible. And sometimes, you know, we get complaints and we hear you about, you know, having to share a dumpster with a neighboring tenant, and they're the ones who might not be covering it. You know, all I can say is that when it's really your responsibility to ensure that It's being covered. Hopefully you can work out with any neighbors that the importance of that, of preventing nuisance conditions for both of you. All right, this is a case where the dumpster is right up against the building. We don't recommend that you put dumpsters right up against the building. Just creates a really nice, easy way for, you know, pests to be attracted to this area and then find their way right into your facility. That's why most times dumpsters are located, in the middle of the parking lot in the back of the facility. Keeping it further away is a better option. Also having big piles of garbage not in closed containers is a violation. Once again, just creates a big nuisance condition and harborage spot for any pests. So this is one of the little sticky pads that a pest controller has put down. Looks like it hasn't been touched for a while. You should be contracting with a registered pest controller, and they should be checking these traps often, or at least on a regular basis, where it should not be as filled up as this is. And you as an operator should be able to go and check, via either your bills or via these little traps if they're marking them when they come to check them each time, just so that you can also keep tabs on whether or not your pest controller is actually maintaining the things that they're setting out for you. This is a picture of a hole that we might notice where there's some type of black greasy buildup here. This is pretty telltale sign of rats going in and out of here. Rats have a pretty greasy coating on their fur that when they go in and out of a hole like this, just kind of rub up against here. So this is one where we would recommend that you call your registered pest controller and see if those types of spots can be filled in and blocked off. These are other types of traps that might be set out by a pest controller. Once again, they might have a little log on here that you can be helping to check to ensure that they are being checked by your pest controller. But then also just in general, like down here, using pest traps like this is a great option. And you should be doing that, but also, having a clean and sanitary place and facility is really the first line of defense against having a pest issue. So down here, I'm seeing some buildup on the floor and pieces of food debris, maybe. You can probably control the majority of your pest issue with just being clean and sanitary. All right, we get a lot of questions about these sticky fly traps. So the rule is that if they have an EPA registration number, then you need to look for that on the package of the product. If it has one of those, you cannot buy it and place it in your facility unless you are a registered pest controller. So there are these sticky traps that do not have those EPA registration numbers on them, and they are purely adhesive, and you can use them. When a product has an EPA registration number, it means that it contains a chemical within the product, and therefore the chemicals are regulated by the EPA and need to be applied by a registered pest controller in order for them to read the manufacturer's instructions and place it carefully. However, these types of products that are purely adhesive and do not contain types of pesticide chemicals, you can use. You just also, I think we have photos and upcoming slides on this. You just have to be really mindful of where you place these. And then also, if they're getting to the point where there's like no vacancy up in here, you should really be monitoring it and replacing it with a fresh one. So this device here, this is a, let's see, it's one of those drink rim moisteners. So you would moisten this sponge here with some lime juice. You would set the rim of your drink cup on here to moisten it, and then there's a little cassette down here that would open up that has your salt or your sugar in it to then put the salt or sugar on the rim of your drink glass. So this is one where we opened up at a bar and it had a nice little cockroach friend right in the crevice here. And obviously some mold growth. This hadn't been used for a while, but it was in the bar area, in a place to be used. The operator voluntarily just discarded this upon seeing it. To mention though, this was right on the other side of the wall of that bar was this pile of garbage. So in thinking about pest control in your facility, you have to be removing garbage on a frequent and regular basis. And being clean and sanitary, that is the #1 line of defense against pests. No bug zappers, right? So if you are, this is not a chemical way to get rid of pests, but we don't want you using any type of piece of equipment that's going to explode the bodies of pests and therefore potentially contaminate food products in your restaurant. Okay, so these are the other types of little adhesive fly strips that we see. These ones typically don't contain an EPA registration number. You do have to check the packaging. If they don't have that, you can place them around your facility. But again, you have to be really mindful of where you're putting them. So in these cases, this fly strip is right over this batch of rice. These ones are being hung right over a prep table. You know, the better places that we've seen them are, you know, right at the back door where the screen door is, where flies might come in, not around food prep tables, away from those things. All right, once again, this boric acid here for roaches. We don't want to see a product like that in your facility if it has an EPA number associated with it. Same thing, roach killing system. If it has an EPA number, can't be there. All right, talking about other smooth, other areas that need to be smooth and easily cleanable, that's going to include all the flooring throughout your food prep and storage areas. So things like this, missing tiles, nooks and crannies are just all available for you to sweep any food debris into and create a harborage spot or an area where pests might like to feast on any remaining debris. So if you have something like this, make sure that you have a plan to make them smooth and easily cleanable. And I know that we have a lot of older facilities that we're not going to expect that something like this is fixed while we're there, but we want to work with you to figure out a reasonable time frame for getting something like this into compliance. Same goes for ceilings. Ceilings need to be smooth, easily cleanable. We shouldn't be seeing things like this. The hoods on your stove should also be cleaned on a regular basis. And it's kind of going to depend on how much food you do and how much greasy food you do. Determines how often you really need to be cleaning these out. Once again, looks like this is covered in foil. Don't use foil to cover any surfaces in your facility. This is just another picture of a very greased up hood vent. And this is a much better example of a cleaned one. Any fluorescent light tubes or any lighting that's in your facility should have covers on them so that they are not easily breakable. So for fluorescent tubes like this, where this facility is maybe unable to find a more traditional cover, it's a little hard to see, but you can see that they have like a plastic tubing over the bulb itself here. And you can get like a pack of 10 of these for, I don't know, a few bucks at a hardware store to slip over each of the fluorescent tubes. It's an easy fix if you don't have it. It's a violation if you don't have it. And, we've had facilities where, they're mopping and then they lift the mop handle too high and they smash a fluorescent tube. And they've had to throw everything out in the kitchen. So it's much better to have a type of cover on these than risk having to throw everything out in there. All right, and this photo is just kind of highlighting how, we see a lot of older facilities that might be holding on to older units or older pieces of equipment that no longer work, and then they're just starting to store other things in those pieces of equipment just for storage space or something. That is a violation to have clutter like this. If you're not using pieces of equipment, they're no longer working and you don't intend on getting them to work, you should just get rid of it. Get rid of the things that you're not using to make room for the things that you need to use. I was searching for a photo of a generally cluttered kitchen. This is one that came up right away. This is the kitchen of Ed Gein, who, if you haven't heard of him, in the 1950s, he had committed several rather gruesome crimes that many popular characters in movies and TV shows have been based off of, including Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs and Psycho. So in this photo, you can see a policeman searching through the kitchen where he finds several bags of human remains. So just in thinking practically about a kitchen and the amount of clutter that you might see, you can see very quickly that when you have this much stuff around, it makes things difficult to clean. It makes things difficult to prep. And we shouldn't see this amount of clutter. The moral of the story is that we shouldn't be like Ed Gein in more ways than one. So that concludes our food workers certification course. Congratulations. It has been an honor to teach you proper food safety. If you have any further questions for follow-up, you can feel free to contact us at the phone number listed on the slide right here. You can send us an email at publichealth@schenectadycounty.com. You can also visit our website at schenectadycounty.com/envhealth. Once again, my name is Jennifer Preeb. I'm Director of Environmental Health for Schenectady County. If you do need to follow up with us and obtain your certification, you'll need to reach out to us and see how you can take the follow-up exam in order to obtain that certification. Thank you.